Hi everybody, Rob here from the Oyster House Boys, and I want to welcome you to what is quite an exciting event really. This is the release of the Moog Subharmonicon. Now, let's get things started by just talking about the physicality of the device. It's probably fairly clear, but it fits in the same kind of format as the Mother 42 and the DFAM. So this will stack happily with them and it plays perfectly well with them. It's got the 32-point patch bay over here. Now, one thing to note on this is you may have clocked there's a little LED there. It's not on at the moment, but Moog do supply an adapter, but the MIDI input for here fits in the patch bay. So there's an adapter there for you, which I prefer. I like having all of those patch points over to this one side because especially if you're stacking them up, I think it just helps to have all of the cables out of the way to one side, and over here you can concentrate on performance or setup. So what is a subharmonicon? Well, I think rather than talking through kind of the history of where it came from, some of the kind of musical technologies that it's based on, I'm going to show you a little bit by just going through some of the controls. So let's start with the voices. Now I'm just going to turn these all the way down. Let's start like this. Let me just grab my headphones so I can better explain this as I go. So I'm just going to press the trigger button. And what you're hearing there is two VCOs. And these controls control the frequency. I'm just going to turn them all down except for this one, which I'll set at 12 o'clock. Okay. So this is a frequency control. And you can see it's got quite a range. I'm just going to turn off these quantizing controls for now as well. And this section here, I'll backtrack slightly. I'm going to say there are two sets of kind of what you have voice-wise. You have this section 1 and section 2. And they're completely kind of independent units except for the quantize and the sequence octave controls. So, back to where I was. We're going to just trigger this again. Let's turn that off. So we have a trigger button, reset next, and tempo for our transpose, and then we have two voices. And what's special about the subharmonicon is the sub frequency. So these aren't your standard kind of sub oscillators that you might see on any other synth you care to mention. And I will turn up the volume of sub oscillator number 1. So you have a mixer section for each of these voices. So you can already hear that coming in, but rather than this just being kind of an octave below here, instead of being a mixer, which you would normally see, which now lives down here, this is actually a separate frequency control. And because we have 3 separate mixed in frequencies, you can see now we have a 3-note chord playing. And if you imagine, we've got the same thing going over here, so let's just crank up the volume of this voice. You can see you can also get microtonal with these. There's a little bit of wiggle room there, so you can play between the notes. So you can get that kind of detune thing going on quite well. Let's crank up these two. So we have extra voices, so we have a total of 6. So then we have a 6-note chord playing from what is essentially 2 oscillators. Now, what these sub-oscillators are doing isn't just playing an octave below the frequency of the main oscillator like you would normally see. They're actually voices in their own right. And what they're doing is, unlike normal subtractive synthesis, they're actually adding harmonics to the frequency. So if you imagine your sine wave, you're actually going to be adding detail to that sine wave rather than detracting, which is the normal way of doing things. Which is great in part, but what can we actually do with that? Well, let's refine the voice a little bit further. So let's look at the envelopes. So we have two envelope generators. We have one for the filter and one for the amplifier. If a cut-off knob like you'd normally see, and it's a resonant filter, which is pretty good. We also have a envelope mount for the filter, which helps you just balance out the controls there. And let's just give ourselves a little bit of a shape. So we'll add some delay or decay to the envelope for the amp, or we can make it clicky. And the same for the filter. So you can shape your sound there. We also have two different waveforms for each voice in the pairs like this. So we can have this set over here to either sawtooth, square, or both mixed, and the same over here. So you can mix and match. So you'd have oscillator 2 set to, say, a square wave, and oscillator 1 to sawtooth. All the way around. It's a subtle change, but it's definitely there. I'm going to set them both to both. I'm going to reduce the cutoff. Now, let's move over to where the magic really happens with this machine, and I'm just going to hit play. And you can see that nothing is happening. And the reason for that is that we haven't assigned these voices to any of the sequences. So we have two sequences, and they look kind of, well, they're a bit like the DFAM actually in control and the way they work. And they're only 4 steps each, which sounds a bit underwhelming, but actually it becomes quite powerful as soon as you start playing around. So what we can do is assign each of these 3 voices in pairs to either of these step sequences. So let's go oscillator 1. It's going to be assigned to sequencer 1, and you can see sequencer 1 on this side and 2 over here, which is something I wasn't quite sure about at first, but actually it makes more sense now. And I'm going to have, so you can assign them all to both if you want, which I will do for now. Now nothing is happening even though the play light is on, and that's because we haven't assigned these sequences to a particular rhythm. So what we have here is 4 different rhythm controls. I've got these all turned down to minimum at the moment, but let's just press sequencer 1. So these 4 steps here will be playing all of these voices. And we have a control here for tempo. Now, what these knobs do, like I mentioned earlier, there's a bit like the DFAM, you can control the pitch. Now, if this doesn't quite correspond to what you might want, you can quantize it. There is an off and then 4 different quantized settings. I prefer 8 ET myself. Let's bring in a second sequence. Let's bring in sequence 2, which will be using this rhythm. Now at the moment they're kind of stepping through at the same kind of speed, even though they're offset. That's because just where I pressed it. So I press reset, they go together, as you can see. Now what I can do, and what's the real kind of magic of this machine, is I can make sequencer 2 run at a different tempo to sequencer 1. So if I use this control here to crank that, hopefully that's already becoming quite clear what's going on and the power of this machine. So let's add sequence 1, so we can make this one here go to rhythm 3. We'll have that one as well. I'll crank this right up. Maybe a bit too fast. Let's slow the overall tempo down. Just give this a bit of extra decay. Now, say there's one in here that you're just becoming a bit too messy and complex. Maybe you'd want to just turn that off a second. Maybe sub 1 isn't necessary. Maybe you don't want that one in there, or maybe sub 2 on this voice is not something you particularly want in this piece. Well, just remove them. that's kind of a bit of a noisy mess at the moment, but hopefully it just kind of shows you what you can achieve with this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn on a reverb, like so, and now when I play this, it'll have just that kind of airiness. That might be a bit overkill. And I think this is getting into the kind of territory that you would find really being popular with Euro rack. And it's kind of polyrhythm stuff that you can't do on a standard synthesizer very easily. I haven't even touched on the patch bay here, but you can pretty much control everything with control voltage. You can patch it into itself, so you could have the frequency of this oscillator controlling the tempo of rhythm 1, 2, 3 or 4, for example. If you look here in typical kind of Mother Family style, you have ins are black and then outs are highlighted with the white. So it's really easy to navigate. You can have the MIDI controlled gate and tempo from this, which is particularly handy. Now this is just a kind of a quick overview, so I'm not going in depth in any of the patching. Below this video you will see, if you're on my site that is, if you're on YouTube then head to my site, I'll put the link in the description, that Moog, as always with these things, provide the little patch point starters, and there will be all of these set up and recorded for you on my SoundCloud, so you'll be able to have a go at those. Let's have a look at the first one though, just so I can show you how it sounds. Let's just make sure these are all where they need to be. So I really like these preset things. I think they're a fantastic way of doing things. Let's just crank that round, that round. It's a great way to learn. I've only had this thing for about a week, but I've already kind of fallen for it. I think it's a fantastic machine. That one and that one, that's fine. That one and that one. Right. Square wave for both. Let's open up, cut off, no attack, a little bit of decay, and no patching. Okay, so I think we're ready to go. So I think one thing that's quite clear is if we could modulate the frequency of VCO1 and use the voices of everything else to kind of add the kind of the rhythmic elements, then we might be off to a good place. So what should we use to, let's just get rid of this a minute. We're kind of spoiled for choice here. Let's go for, well, we could actually use VCO2 to control the pitch of VCO1, or the frequency of VCO1. There you go, one simple patch and that's sorted. Let's do one more. Let's take another out from something else. So we could take the clock from sequence 2 to control the frequency of VCO1. Okay, let's just make this a bit more interesting. Let's go for the clock from sequence of 1 controlling one of the subs, maybe. Actually, let's go for the pulse width of VCO2. And what I'll do is I'll just turn down the left-hand side. Okay, so I think that's been a good little intro. The DFAM and the mother are certainly going to be welcoming the Subharmonicon into the family, I'm sure, because it's a fantastic device and it opens up a very different workflow, which I think a lot of people appreciate, and it'll open up things that maybe Eurorack enthusiasts have been doing for a while, but traditional synthesists haven't been doing that much, or if they have, they've only been touching on it. And I think the DFAM was the first step in that. But this is really going to kind of open those doors for people. Now, like I said, I'll be doing more videos on this, showing some patching examples, but for now, just have a look below and I'll have all of these set up and recorded. And what I'll do is I'll record them all and I'll add in reverb halfway through each recording so you can hear what it sounds like in a slightly more traditional setting. Right, thanks very much. I've been Rob from the Oyster House Boys. If you like these kind of gear intros and overviews, then let me know and I'll do plenty more of them. I've got a Moog one coming soon, so I'll do one on that. And I've got, Profits and Grandmothers and all sorts already in the studio, so we can talk about those. Right, thanks very much and see you next time. Bye-bye.